So you're doing your chemistry class and you're wondering what is a solution. You have all kind of vocabulary words, including solute, solvent. You have saturated solution, supersaturated solution, and you don't know what they mean. Stay with us. We're going to go through the vocabulary related to solutions in chemistry, and you'll see you're going to learn quite a bit. When you think of a solution, you have to keep in mind that it's not just water, but it is a mixture. And it's a mixture that involves several components together, several matter. Now, there are different ways that they can be mixed together. So here we're talking about chemistry, we're talking about pure substances, and let's see if we can define it a little bit more. One other aspect to consider is that in a solution, we have a solute and we have a solvent. So this means that in this solution you have, the solute is always the smallest of the quantities there. So this is the smallest quantity that is dissolved, or it is included in a much larger volume of other substance that is called a solvent. Here, the biggest. For example, you're taking, let's see, you're taking a tea. In your tea, you're putting a tea bag in hot water. So here what you have the solute, which will be the flavor of the tea that is dissolved in water. That is the solvent, which is in much bigger quantities. Now, if you give me a few minutes, I'm going to give you more examples about what solutes and solvents are. The next thing we can talk about are what we call aqueous solutions. An aqueous solution is a solution, so therefore a mixture of pure substances where you have a solute dissolved in a solvent, but here the solvent is, and I'm sure you've guessed it, water. So here, let's see if we can give a few more examples of what is a solution. Welcome to my channel. My name is Alain Faber and I've been teaching science for more than 25 years. You are here with me because you want to learn something more about science. I'm doing some videos here in chemistry, and some of those topics I'm learning along because it's quite amazing. I've done those years ago, but it's always good to be able to review what we know, but also help you. And on top of that, I'm doing this video especially for someone that I'm tutoring right now and has questions. On this, stay with us and let's learn more about solutions. We're going to take some time to look at some examples of solutes dissolved in solvent. And here we're going to look at the three phases of matter. So for example, if you have a gas that is dissolved or that is mixed within another gas, for example, you can think of CO2 in the atmosphere. Here you have CO2, which is a small quantity of gas, which is within the atmosphere, made of oxygen and nitrogen. So here's a good example. If you take a gas that is dissolved in a liquid, not necessarily dissolved, but mixed in a volume of liquid, you can think of pop. A pop, for example, if you are opening a can, you can hear the gas escape. So what you have gas molecules that are mixed inside a sugared liquid, and therefore giving you this way that they are mixed together. If you're thinking of gas in a solid, you could think, for example, snow is a great example. In the winter, we have gas, for example, atmosphere, so therefore nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide that is interwoven inside snow. And that is the one reason the snow is white, allowing the light of the sun to be refracted within the snowflakes. Now, what do we mean by having a liquid that is dissolved in a gas? One example for this would be humidity. So for example, if you have, it's a hot day and you have evaporation, You have liquid water that is going into the atmosphere, hence having a mixture. An example of a liquid solute dissolved in a liquid solvent would be, for example, food coloring in water, for example, or food coloring you are mixing with a solution or a liquid to make colors for what you're cooking. So food coloring in water, that's a great example. An example of a liquid that is in a solid would be, for example, a paint. If you think of oil paint, when you have oil mixed with a pigment, so you can make a paint, so that's in the old days. So we have, for example, oil in pigments for art. That would be a great idea. So let's see, can we have a solid dissolved in gas? I was trying to look for an example for this one and I haven't found one yet. If you have an idea, put them in the comments below. Then the other example is a solid that is dissolved in a liquid. So here you could, for example, you have sugar dissolved in water. That's a great example. And a solid dissolved in a solid. So here we call them solid solutions. And I'll give you a few examples. Solid solution would be, for example, brass. Brass is a mix of two metals or three mixed together. That's interesting. You can have stainless steel. When you have iron, you have nickel, chrome, and a few other metals. This is a solid solution. And here you have, I was thinking of a glass here. When you have a glass, you can hear it. So let's see. So here you have a mix of silica oxide and a few other particles that makes the type of crystal that is quite amazing. So these are the examples that I have for you with respect to how we can have different solutes being dissolved in different solvents. To continue with our exploration of solutions, we are going to go into the word that is called solubility. Solubility here is about a solute that can dissolve in a solvent, but it's not always the same quantities that can be dissolved. So let's see if we can look at three different options. The first one is called a saturated solution. So a saturated solution is a solution that have a solute and a solvent together. And what happens is that there's just enough solute in the solvent so that everything is dissolved nicely. For example, if you take, let's see, you have salt. If you take a pinch of salt and you put it in the water and you mix, all the salt will evaporate. No, will mix. It gets to a point where if you add a bit more salt, it dissolves. You add a bit more salt, it dissolves. And you get to a point where if you add a few grains of salt, they will go at the bottom of the glass and they will not dissolve at all. So that means that we have reached a point of saturation. The solution is containing as much solute as it can. It's called a saturated solution. We have here what we call an unsaturated solution. This one here is my example of salt. If you put a pinch of salt in water, everything dissolves. That means that the solvent could dissolve a bit more solute, but it's not quite there yet. Same thing with sugar. You mix sugar in water, it is unsaturated. If you take any pop on the market, you've got sugared water. It is what we call here. Now we have what we call also a supersaturated solution. Now, a supersaturated solution, that means that it is not only a saturated solution, but we find a way to dissolve more than it can originally do in set conditions. So here's an example. If I want to, let's see if you can take, I'm going to take maple syrup as a great example. When you take the sap of a tree, you have what we call an unsaturated solution. You have the sap that contains some sugar and some other minerals, and it's a weak taste if you taste the sap. Now, what happens is that you are increasing the temperature, you are evaporating the water. So what happens, it gets to a point where there's enough sugar in the solution that you end up with, for example, it gets maple syrup. And if you evaporate it a little bit more, then you end up with toffee. Toffee is a very thick substances that has a very high viscosity and slowly can go down a slope. But it gets to a point where if you continue to evaporate the water, what happens is that at some point you have toffee, but you get to a point where the temperature is high enough to contain the sugar in the water. But if you let it cool down, what happens is you end up with maple sugar. You were at a temperature where you had a solution that was liquid or liquid-like, that contained sugar, but was still had a toffee texture. But because you lowered the temperature, what happened is the solution could no longer stay in a liquid portion. It became a solid right away. So that's an example of super saturated. If you take my example with the salt, so you put a pinch of salt, the salt dissolves in the water, you put a bit more, then you notice a few grains of salt going at the bottom of the glass. Now, interestingly enough, if you heat up that water, then the few salt crystals in the bottom of your glass or your pot will dissolve. And then you can add a bit more salt, a bit more salt. So what will happen is that you have hot water that contains more salt than it would if it was at room temperature. So this is what we call a super saturated solution. So in this video, we spent time to look at the vocabulary behind what is a solution, which is the title right here. It raises a lot of questions you may have. So if you have questions or clarification questions, put them in the comments below. I'm here to help you. Otherwise, stay here on this channel. I'm going to have another video with the next step in solution. And here we're going to talk about factors that affect the solubility or the rate of dissolution. So that will be my next video, and I'm going to put it right here.